Welcome. My name is Emily Westberg, and I am an AMI trained children's house guide, which is the primary level of Montessori. I'm also the director of a school in Oregon, and I am here tonight to talk to you about the role of the Montessori completion year in Montessori education, specifically at the children's house level. There are themes within Montessori where they tend to be in 3-year groupings. And you could, in many ways, translate what I'm talking about tonight to other levels as far as how the program works in a 3 to 4-year format. I'm going to get this started here and we'll dive right in. So, we look at Montessori as an aid to life. Beyond more than academic learning, we are serving the whole human being. This is a lot to cover tonight. So hopefully the recording format will be helpful as you can stop and start as you have time. We're going to be first acknowledging that throughout a child's life, parents make many important decisions on their behalf, hoping that what they are doing is the thing that is what's best for their child. If you're already part of a Montessori program, you may have already made the commitment to completing it when you enrolled them. The completion year of a child often coincides with mainstream education kindergarten, which is partially federally funded. So this can be a time of questioning. The goal of this presentation is to provide an overview of why the program is not complete without this 3rd or 4th completion year. We're going to look at some of what the science is saying about how children learn, an overview of the Montessori primary level, we call it the children's house, and a brief overview of human development. At the end, we'll offer some ways to identify when your child is ready for the transition to elementary school. So Montessori basics, which you likely already know if you're here, are that we have mixed age groups. Lessons are progressive and they contain indirect preparations. What does that mean? We're going to cover that a little bit more in detail. It involves movement, children's interest. We support independence, and our approach is based on the scientific observation of how children actually learn. This is a bigger topic than we have time to get into tonight, but basically what we do is based on 120 years of international evidence. If you want to dive deeper in, I would recommend 2 different resources for you. You can check out a book called The Science Behind the Genius by Angelina Polk Lillard. She basically looks over hundreds, maybe thousands of different research papers that have kind of drawn conclusions and shown evidence of different aspects of how children learn. And she's pulled them together. And basically what it says is everything we've been doing for 120 years in Montessori is best practice for how children learn. It's part of what drew me to Montessori as I was a psychology undergrad, reading some of those research papers. And when I met Montessori, I felt before the book came out that these types of things were in alignment already in the Montessori system. So this book is a wonderful sort of way to pull all of that together if you're a science-minded person. Another great resource are Vimeo lectures by Dr. Stephen Hughes. He's a pediatric neuropsychologist, and he just talks kind of in the same way that Lillard talks about how science is just confirming what Montessori does. And then there's, of course, your own experiences. Coming in to observe, you get to see for yourself. Another way to look at this is some of the basic themes that are coming out of that scientific support. So science is saying that learning and memory work best when they're accompanied by movement. Tutors benefit as much as those they are helping. When children are shown how to do a task and then are free to imitate it, they retain the information longer. Isn't that what learning is? Children are more likely to perceive something as relevant when they learn it in a familiar environment and then are free to apply it directly in that place at a time of their choosing. Science is also saying that independent choice, interest, and a child's perceived control over what they're doing impacts their satisfaction, their creativity of what they do with that task, their investment in it, and then their ability to self regulate. When a child is doing a task that is free from external reasons, that could include rewards or punishments, grades are a type of reward or punishment, or they're told that they have to, when they're free from those things, that they complete the task faster. They do it with greater detail. They choose a greater level of difficulty and they enjoy it more. This friend right here that we're looking at came into the children's house eager to learn, but had some issues with regulation and would get pretty silly and play around and really loved his friends, but had a hard time focusing. With some observation over time, we came to notice that the way he was holding things and looking at things seemed a little odd. We talked with his parents. They were able to get him in to get his vision checked. And sure enough, he had a vision impairment. Once they were able to get that corrected with glasses, we saw a change. We saw some more focus, and we just happened to stumble onto one of his greatest interests, which was geography. He basically taught himself to read using the Montessori materials and eventually just had an insatiable appetite for the puzzle maps in geography. He mastered every map with every country in the world. He would sit for long periods of time looking at the atlas, memorizing the capitals of the countries. And in time, he knew all of those and had moved on to rivers and monuments and forests and mountain ranges. So, luckily, at the time, I was working in a Montessori program that had an elementary school. We were able to go into the elementary classroom and borrow their pin maps. And what he's doing in this picture is teaching himself by reading the map where the different mountain ranges, monuments, rivers, forests, and other more specific details of South America are. And then he's picking out the little flag and finding the corresponding location on the map. Science is saying that executive function is really important for how we move through the world as people. We support in Montessori the development of executive functioning skills. That is planning, reasoning, the ability to solve problems, and to regulate your behavior. Looking at this picture, you might wonder how all of that plays together. Well, no one is telling these children to do this, first of all. Second, they're having to challenge their body and their ability to kind of stay focused and balance and work together to take their turns and make sure they're not bumping into anyone else. And they're doing it because they want to. So this is just a micro picture of ways that this shows up in the classroom. We'll go into more later. The ability to regulate behavior is a big one. So take a look at the picture that's happening here. One of the children who's touching the material, the decanomial square, is working on this massive project with hundreds of pieces, and it starts out very small and gets exponentially larger. We'll go into a little bit more on this particular material later in the presentation, but what I want us to look at here is the interest of all of the other children who are watching. So we have a rule that you're not allowed to touch other people's work without asking. And in general, we want children to be able to do their work without being interrupted. So we show the children how to observe without interrupting. We show the children how to ask. But these children are just mostly transfixed on what's happening as they watch this teeny tiny little, about 1 centimeter squared piece turn into a puzzle that fits the whole rug. And of course, it's very shiny and lovely. And the child who's working on it is concentrating. The rest of them are having to use everything in their body and their willpower to stop from touching his work. And this very seemingly small detail is a huge builder of executive functions. Just being able to stop yourself from doing something that you want to, and kind of knowing that um, you need to wait, those types of things. It shows up in lots of other ways in the Montessori classroom as well, as we only have one type of material for each classroom. And so even though the shelves are full of many different things, we intentionally have about one of each thing, so that children have to wait and navigate that factor when they're making their choices about what they want to do. So if they want to use the decanomial square, which we're looking at right now, they have to wait until this child puts it all away and puts it back on the shelf. So that's where you can choose your work from in the Children's House. It has to be on the shelf, and you have to have had a lesson where the guide has shown you how to use it. So children are moving through the environment. They may be seeing lots of things that are appealing to them. They may be allowed to dust it. In some cases, they may be allowed to polish or clean the item, but they're not allowed to use it until the guide has specifically shown them how. And so they are constantly, just with that factor alone, having to withhold their impulses to do certain things. That is an exercise that builds executive functioning. Also, once they've had the lesson, maybe they want to be using the decanomial square, but right now someone else is using it. So now they need to figure out what to do. Are they going to wait? Are they going to watch the child who's using it and see what they do with it? See when they put it away? Are they going to go choose something else? Are they going to go have some snack? And then remember to return to it later. All of that planning, that reasoning, that problem solving, and having to regulate their behavior builds executive functioning. That's just one example of how it works. So we provide a high level of autonomy. It doesn't mean that children are allowed to do whatever they want. This is important, but they're still given some choice. They're allowed to move freely within reason, safely. There's only one of each material. We talked about that. We have a developmentally appropriate freedoms and limits. We could have a whole presentation just on that. That's an area worth research and diving into. There's spontaneous socialization happening constantly. We use natural consequences. For example, you see this child who is pouring right now with a glass pitcher. We have glass objects, and that is for many reasons. We want children to have access to real things, but we also want them to learn how to handle those things appropriately. And so what happens if you're not paying attention and you're carrying your tray and you get distracted and suddenly your tray is tilted and your pitcher falls down and it's made of glass? It breaks. And so we teach the children how to hold things carefully, but then allow them the freedom to practice what we've shown them. And a lot of times we'll do it with coaching at first in what we call a grace and courtesy lesson, where we'll model for children how to move and do a certain task. Then we'll give them a chance to do it and be a model for the other children. And then everyone can have a turn as they, find that work. Maybe it's on a table, just one pitcher, and they're getting a chance to just practice carrying a pitcher. When the pitcher is back, then someone else can do it. But there are times where it's going to break. And so we have a procedure for how we handle broken glass. We show the children using a dustpan and a hand brush versus our hands, because picking up glass for an adult is different than picking up glass for a child who doesn't yet have the mastery of how to hold things carefully and know where to touch so that they don't get cut. So we model the appropriate way to handle that safely for them, which would be to sweep it up. But we, the adults, are always the ones who do it. And we show the children how to be safe and stand back. And so there's a way to handle problems, but we allow those natural consequences to occur. That's going to be the teacher for the child. We don't have to say, oh, you need to be so careful with the glass. We don't have to try to protect them from that within reason, but we do show them how to handle things carefully, how to be safe around something when it breaks, how to get an adult for help, those types of things. Those are real skills, things that they may need in their life tomorrow when something like that happens at home. We also use friendliness with error. We'll dive into what that looks like too. So last spring, we had parents come and observe, and as they were leaving their observation, we asked them to write down some thoughts about what they saw. These are just a few. We have more on our website, but here's what the parents were saying. The classroom is filled with such happiness and joy. The children seem to love being here and are immersed in their work. Bigger kids are helpers to smaller kids. It is immediately evident that everyone in the space, from the young ones to the guide, moves with a sense of purpose. Eye-opening to see the kids doing tasks an adult would normally complete by default. It points out how much we underestimate their abilities. Children were not rushed. They were allowed to have their emotions. They seemed to really love what they were doing. A safe place to belong and become. So, getting down to it, why isn't a child's experience complete unless they stay through their kindergarten year? To understand why, we really have to look at the whole program and how it works. So, in year one, children are mostly focused, well, there's lots going on, but they're mostly focused on the orientation to the environment, to the social environment, to the physical environment, to the routine, the what to do's, the where to's, like where do you find an adult? Where do you find a spill cloth when a spill happens? How to dry a spill, how to carry a chair. A child is modeling this in this photo here. We have very specific ways that we do things, and all of those specific ways help us to be safe together in this environment in the children's house. So carrying a chair does have a specific way. Children can move the chairs. Sometimes we will have a gathering where we invite children to each get a chair and come sit. Maybe that's a wiggly day, and having a space will help everyone to be a little more regulated, their own chair. So to do that safely, we don't want children walking around pointing the chair legs out and running into people and things. So we start out right away showing them what our expectation is, how to do it, giving them a chance to practice. And this is the way we do it. One hand under the seat, one hand on the back of the chair, legs pointed down. But first, we just show them how without an explanation and give them a chance to practice. So all of these specific things, these ways that help children to be safe. For example, if this child was carrying the chair and she tripped, she's going to fall with her chest onto the seat versus getting poked in some other way. It's going to be the safest way. We have thought out all of these types of details in the children's house. So in the first year, a child is getting exposed to all of that, learning what to do, where to do it, how to, the who to's and the what not to's. There's a little guy over here who's walking on the line. He's just learning how to balance. Young children are working on coordinating their movements, and it's part of their formation of their ability to make choices and use their willpower, aligning their mind with their body. So he's working on that. That alone is a big work, but he's also noticing what the other children are doing. And if you see this little girl sitting by the rug, she has stopped her work because she's taking in what the older children are doing right now. So children are also observing and absorbing the lessons that are happening, the adults and what they do and how to get help and how they're modeling movement and speech. and the language that's happening. You might hear your child come home in the first year and say, "I'm not available." That's a way that we help them understand that, that material that that child is using on the rug, that beautiful puzzle, they're going to have to wait until it's back on the shelf. It is not available. There's all kinds of new language they're taking in. Children in their first year are learning from their experiences with the preliminary level of materials and activities. Here we have a little girl painting our cat, Clara. In the second year, children are doing a lot of the same, kind of finishing up on the work of the first year. Now they're also exploring their new ability to help the younger children who've just joined. This is an exciting opportunity for them. And they get to explore how to work with different personalities. Each new 3-year-old is different. And they have new types of lessons that they've had that they can show. They're also seeing what is possible as they watch the kindergartners excel before their very eyes. They're expanding their capacities. You have to build your own skills before you can work in collaboration with others and have something meaningful to contribute. So they're still continuing to work on their own with their hands, using real things and concentrating. They're strengthening their executive functions the whole time that they are in the Children's House. That is something they'll be doing. And they're working with the intermediate levels of materials and activities. In that completion year, which sometimes is in their third year and sometimes is in their fourth year, we'll look at a little further in the presentation what's happening developmentally and why it could be 4 years for some children. But in that year, they're applying skills in real life situations. So now it's not just practice, something they're getting off the shelf using or imitating what they've seen other people doing. Now something different is happening. They are aware that they know something and they can assess a situation in which that thing that they now know will make sense to do. So they can solve problems. They're doing tasks for a reason. Their interests begin to shift from process-oriented to product-oriented. So the first 2 years, the children are really working with a lot of concrete materials and may not have a lot of things that are coming home. They're not necessarily doing a lot of writing or making a ton of art. They should be doing some, of course, but they are more focused on doing something just for the sake of doing it. Maybe for the movements or something sensory about it is appealing. Now, as the children are in their completion year, they are shifting toward wanting to make something. And that is more of a product orientation. The child's areas of interests, strengths, and challenges become clear. Giving spontaneous lessons to younger children is happening. Here in this picture, we have an older child in his completion year showing a second-year child the decimal system. And if you look, he is very intense on making sure this child is paying attention. I had previously invited that younger child to do something else, which he just in the moment happened to not want to do, and instead came over and watched what this older child was doing. Now, if we were trying to show that younger child that lesson, it's very possible that he wouldn't be paying attention or he might be distracted. But because it's happening with an older child, and that older child has a brain that is closer in age to that younger child, he's doing it in a way that is appealing to this younger child in a way an adult can't necessarily do. So it's really exciting to see this kind of thing happening spontaneously. He's showing him how he's holding a 100 in the decimal system golden beads in his hand, and he's showing him how to count how many hundreds are in the 1,000 cube. So they're giving spontaneous lessons to younger children. There's an exponential expansion of children's capacities from the foundation of all their previous work with the Montessori materials. It suddenly starts to coalesce. And you're going to see in a little bit how we are planting seeds in many different parts of the environment and in the children's experience so that they can pull it together in their own time and in their own way And it really becomes their own creation. And there is a point around year 3 that it just becomes exponential as they coalesce all these different separate pieces and indirect preparations. They're working with the advanced level of materials and activities as well. Let's take a minute to look at social emotional development before we go on to what's happening in the curriculum. So we have mixed age classrooms. Those provide natural leadership and spontaneous social interaction for the children. Learning happens at an individual pace. Children learn how to navigate conflict in a healthy and effective way. Conflict is a part of life, and it happens every day in our children's house. But we show the children and support them and coach them in how to be able to express what they're feeling, to acknowledge what someone else is feeling, and then to move on when it feels complete. We are in our children's house show there is emerging emerging self-regulation and executive functioning. So those things are kind of happening in little bits all the time. And there's developmentally appropriate freedom within developmentally appropriate limits. Here's a few photos of children doing things together. We have the children who stay through the afternoon have lunch together. That's a social time. We have other types of projects we'll do. Here we're making Concord grape juice. The children in the upper left corner have harvested from our garden. In the completion year, what's happening for a child socially and emotionally? They're expanding their awareness of the whole cycle and the system and then their place within it. So now they've been the youngest child, then they've been the second year child who now has something to show and teach to the younger child. In their third year, they start to not only be aware of, the first and second year and what's going on there, but just how the whole system functions. This is a time where we will typically, as the adults in the children's house, start to see those children in their completion year making a lot more eye contact with us when silly or funny things happen that the other younger children aren't even aware of. So they see a little bit more than the rest of the children see, and they we'll get into a little bit more of what that looks like here. So they also desire to solve community problems of their own choosing and with original and practical solutions. There's an emerging deep sense of compassion for all living things that happens during that completion year. Here we have about 6 different children who are looking at an insect in a jar. I got a little excited with the Photoshop, so you'll see things might look a little bit, my goal was that they look more like portraits when we look at them, but they might look a little fuzzy. So I have a story from when I was a new teacher. And I thought it'd be really fun to get Venus flytraps for the class. Now, if you know anything about this is a carnivorous plant. They kind of have what looks like a jaw with teeth, and they wait for an insect to kind of come into their sweet little trap that they have. And there's some kind of a trigger once they feel the movement of that insect that closes their little trap, and they're able to slowly over time digest the insect. This is critical that the insect is in there when their little plant jaws close, because if there isn't an insect in there, they have just used all of their energy to facilitate that movement, and now they have no food and energy. So they will die if their little hairs that sense the movement are triggered and there's nothing in there to eat. And so what I didn't understand at the time was that you cannot explain that to a 3 and 4-year-old. You can try, but it's very likely that they are just going to hear you say, when it gets touched or triggered, it closes, and they're going to want to see that happen. They're just going to be curious and not understand the consequence of that. Whereas the 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds, they very much understand that reason. And so the 5 and 6-year-olds, they understood we cannot touch that. But as it would happen, the 3 and 4-year-olds got to the Venus flytraps and were just curious and saw the cause and reaction when they touched it, and the mouths closed. And so the 5 and 6 year olds were very upset. We all watched them wither and die. And soon we just had a pot of soil sitting on the shelf. We talked about it and we decided that we would write them a note that says, "We're so sorry that this happened. We hope that you'll grow and come back. We'll take better care of you next time." And so I showed the children how to just walk by the pot, say something nice to it, grow, grow, grow. And the children did this. They would, every time they walked by, they would say something nice. "We're so sorry this happened." We had the note on it. And wouldn't you know, 2 weeks later, we had some new Venus flytraps growing. But it was very upsetting to those older children that this had happened. And luckily they grew back. But it is something we need to honor in the older child. There's emergent reasoning. We'd kind of talked about that with the Venus flytraps, an ability to understand reasons that just isn't there with 3 and 4 year olds. You really are wasting your breath when you talk about reasons, or "we need to do this because." You might as well just skip all of that, save your breath, and say, "It's time to." It's just more clear. It honors where they are developmentally and what their brain is capable of. Whereas these older children start to have an ability to understand reasons. You could talk with them about that a little more. There's an increasing capacity and emergent need to work with others. This is new. Younger children are parallel learners. They love to work next to their friends. You could hear 2 4-year-olds say, "Let's work together," and then watch them each go get out their own rug, each go get out their own puzzle map, and then work next to each other. They might occasionally chat about something, but mostly they're each doing their own thing in parallel. Older children really want to work together to make something happen. They also have a desire for big work and challenge. You can see this group of our 6-year-olds over here approaching the brown stair now with a new challenge, trying to get all of the pieces built and not have it topple over. So this is very challenging, and it's so exciting. You can see one child kind of giggling in the background while the other two are extremely focused. Let's dive into practical life. This is one area of the classroom. I'm not going to read this whole quote by Dr. Montessori. Feel free to pause and read it if you like. Definitely a good one here. But basically, in her book, From Childhood to Adolescence, she's outlining what practical life exercises look like in the children's house. And basically, these are things that we need to do to take care of our environment, to take care of our bodies, and to know how to be together socially. She mentions that it's not about class. Sometimes people equate having to do cleaning types of things as something that shouldn't be part of education, or "Why are you having the children polish the brass objects?" Well, we're not having them polish the brass objects to actually get them polished. We'll see in a little while that they aren't actually often getting them shinier, but it's for a different reason. There's an actual education that's happening through these different exercises. Mainly that the children feel like they're doing something purposeful. That is a huge part of why we do it. But there's a burst of independence that comes from them being allowed to do these types of purposeful work. And Dr. Montessori, always the advocate of the child, said it's a burst of independence of all unnecessary assistance that suppresses children's activity and prevents them from demonstrating their own capacities. And she means independence from adults and unnecessary help. Here's some more practical life. These are some seasonal things that we've done. We've had a parent bring in their cider press and make apple cider, children pouring the juice for popsicles in the summer, and then for our Santa Lucia celebration, making the Santa Lucia buns. Those were kind of special activities. Here we have a little bit more of an everyday kind of typical scene that you might see. Some themes in practical life include purposeful movement. We talked about that a little bit. This is a departure from mainstream children's activities. So think about what's marketed as something children like to do, or toys, right? So a child might get a set of wooden food pieces that are held together by Velcro, and then we give them a wooden knife to pretend that they're cutting. So Dr. Montessori called that, we're giving them things in facsimile. They're not in reality. Um, and look over here, we've got a child cutting a banana with a real knife, being trusted. She's earned that responsibility to be able to hold a sharp object, and has to continually demonstrate that she can be safe with that, and to keep the other children safe while she's doing it. But look at the concentration. How do you think she feels when she finishes slicing that banana and now has a tray that she gets to walk around and offer to her peers? How is that different from cutting a wooden banana? Activities provide children opportunities to be an active participant in a living scene. So we can see in the lower left photo, there's a child who's working on some kind of a dressing frame, maybe practicing buttons. And she's one of the younger children, and she's now getting to work near the other children. And everybody kind of has their own thing they're working on. They have purpose, and they get to feel like they are part of a community, which they are. We give the children child-sized real tools. This little guy here in the corner, he's slicing a baby dill pickle. Pretty excited about it too. So these are foundations for learning. They're movements that are involved in the practical life exercise. They include a number of sequential steps. And when a child gets to start, move through those steps, and come to completion, it leads to increased order, coordination, concentration, and independence. These are big things for being able to learn. You have to be able to do these things, have a sense of order. Here are some more examples. From left to right, we have a child who's sewing, and that is building strength with his pincer grip. We have another child who's cutting. And then sometimes the practical work, practical life work, doesn't have a concrete material. It might be an image or a social interaction that we've shown the children. We have a dog at our school, and we have a cat who lives there. And these are ambassadors for cats and dogs everywhere, and showing the children how to read the language of a cat, the body language of a cat and a dog, how to properly greet them, how to pet them, and how to move away when you're done. And if you don't want to, how to move away. So you can see we're showing the children how to greet a dog up in the right corner. And in the bottom, we might ask this child, does Clara seem happy when you're hovering over her? Is that okay? Let's see, are her ears pointed? Are they, is she purring? You know, we notice those types of things every time a child is with the animals, and they are supervised closely. Here are some more practical life work examples. Our dressing frames are wonderful. They take one type of fastening that children will experience in their clothing, and they take them off of their body, and then they give them repetition. So the guide, when they show a child how to use these, is going to show one step of how to unbutton on the top button. Then they're going to do the same thing on the next button, the same thing on the third button, so on, 5 times before they move on to the next step. So a child is really getting to see slowly and carefully each of the steps of how to do these complicated types of fastenings. The bow frame, of course, is a rite of passage. A lot of children, when they see parents help them with tying, it looks like they're just doing a quick jumble of their hands, and then voila, there's a bow. But the bow frame helps to break that down into those sequential steps, and we show it slowly, and it gives the child the opportunity to master each micro step that is within that complicated task of tying a bow. Young children are doing things for a different reason than the older children. So this was one of Dr. Montessori's major discoveries, and it really set her on the path of studying human development, and it was with the hand washing work. So we, to this day in the children's house, have a material that looks like the way people used to wash their hands in the time of Dr. Montessori before there was indoor plumbing. So this hand washing activity has a basin, it has a pitcher that I think is likely under the table there, and it's got a little nail brush, and it's got a bar of soap, and it's got a cloth and a bucket and a towel. And so when we show the children how to do the hand washing, there are about 30 different steps in how you do this. First, you set the towel on the table, then you carry your pitcher with two hands to the water source. You carry it back. You try to keep all the water in the pitcher without spilling a drop. You pour it slowly so it doesn't splash into the basin, and then you set your pitcher down below the table. You immerse your hands in the water. It should feel good, nice warm water. We get the soap, we scrub it on our hands. Now we set the soap back on the dish. We're rubbing to make bubbles in the palms of our hands. Now we're flipping over one of our hands and washing the back of the hand. We're washing around our wrists, around each finger. Now we're doing that on the other hand. Repeat. We're getting the nail brush. We're getting it wet. We're putting it on the soap. We're scrubbing underneath our fingernails on one hand. We're flipping and doing it on the other hand. We're rinsing the brush. We're putting it back. We're immersing our hands in the water to rinse. We're getting the towel and we're drying them. We have to have dry hands when we carry the basin to pour it out into the bucket. So now we're getting our bucket out. We're pouring the gray water into the bucket. We're putting the basin back. We're carrying the bucket to the gray water location, wherever we discard gray water there without spilling a drop again, which is supporting their coordination of movement. We're returning it to its place, and now we're drying everything and getting it ready for the next person, right? You wash your hands and you're done. No, not with 3 and 4-year-olds. With 3 and 4-year-olds, sometimes they want to do it again. Why, you would wonder? We've already washed our hands. They're clean. Well, that's not why a younger children is doing most of what they're doing. They're not doing it for the reason that the activity may be intended for. Dr. Montessori saw this specifically with the hand washing work. It was her sort of window into this phenomena of young children. She saw that they, as soon as they finished, would go get new water and start the process over again, sometimes doing this many times in a row. And when they finished, it might not be at the very end after they've dried everything. They might just be done. And when they emerge, though, there's something really special. The child seems to have some kind of a invigoration that has happened, like a deep sigh, like, and now they go and they do a victory lap. They go and they check in with their friends. They're giving compliments. They seem stronger. They seem healthier. They seem revived. They seem benevolent to the other children around them. This is something special that's happening when they're allowed to follow a sequence and to do it with concentration and to be free from an adult stepping in and saying, okay, you're done. Stop getting more water. Allowed to do it in their own time and in their own choosing. It's really a neat thing to see, but it's not the same as the way an adult or even an older child does things. So here's another example. This love of movement and this need for order and to imitate what they see people around them doing, which their absorbent minds are driving them to do, to become a person of their time and place. They're taking everything in. So here, a guide might show a 3-year-old one of the early preliminary lessons in folding. The folding activity that the child's doing on the left is just to repeat the movements, to see the order. These are a set of about 6 different pieces of fabric that have been sewn, and they have a line indicating where the child should fold. And you fold the cloth so that you can see the line emerge again, and you get a different shape with each type of folding. You fold it in half, you get a rectangle. You turn it diagonally and you fold it in half, you get a triangle, and so on. And so it's just about the movements, about practicing, about seeing the line again, and getting some early experience with folding different ways. The child on the right is in his completion year, and now he's folding the laundry, and he's folding and rolling the spill cloths that we use whenever that child who was just washing their hands spilled a few drops of water or sometimes the whole bucket. And we're going to need a lot of spill cloths or the mop. And so he knows that these are an important part of the community life and that we need them every day. And he's doing that because he wants to be of help. And he knows that that's an important thing. So we see sort of an evolution in the child's time with us in the children's house. So it kind of starts out as, I can do it myself, you hear them say. In their next year, now they realize that that thing that they can do, they've mastered the zipper frame on the dressing frames. Now they can use that skill to help other people. And you'll hear them, oh, can someone help me with my zipper? Or, to the teacher, a child might say, can you please help me zip? And one of these children will jump in and say, I can help you. And they are very excited to use their skill to help other people. In their completion year now, with their broader perspective and their reasoning mind that's emerging, they realize that they can help their community. And the way that I've heard children say this often is, I can help the earth. They somehow equate what they're doing as helping their environment, their specific local children's house environment, with helping the earth. And it helps them to feel like they're a contributing member of society. There are also indirect preparations. What does that mean? It means that within one activity, there are other types of preparations that are in place that will help a child later with other types of skills. So one of those that we see in practical life is logical sequencing. Like the story of the hand washing, if you were to skip any of those steps, you're not going to get the same result. So if you try to start out by getting the soap on your hands, but you haven't yet gotten your hands wet, what's going to happen? No bubbles, nothing. And so the children often will try these things, and it might be the way that they perceived the lesson, but the materials are complete and they have everything the child needs so that they can navigate that on their own. Nothing's happening. I'm putting the soap on my hands, but I'm not getting bubbles. What do I need to do? And so they might try something different. So they're able to sort of see the logic through their own experience and trial and error with the materials. Another example would be washing a table. It's really common that we'll see children forget to wipe the sponge on the table, the wet sponge, before they put the scrub brush that has soap on the bristles on. And again, you get no bubbles. And so there is a sequence that they need to follow to get certain things to happen. This child in the picture is polishing a glass box. So if they forget one step, they're not going to be able to make it as shiny. It's a type of polishing. So the observation comes in with observing the lesson. There are indirect preparations for reading and writing. This child in the picture is washing a chalkboard. Anytime we're washing, we start showing a child that we start in the upper left-hand corner, the same place where we start to read or write, and we go to the right. When we finish one row, we go down another, and we start at the left again and go to the right. So we're going from left to right and top to bottom. We don't explain that. We don't say, this is how you wash the table so that your eyes and your hands will be ready for reading and writing. We simply say, I'm going to show you how to wash a chalkboard. But everything that we do is very thoughtfully and mindfully done to support where the children is going next in their learning. There's also, of course, the strengthening of the hands and arms for writing. Here a child's removing seeds from a sunflower and using tweezers. That is strengthening her pincer grip, for which she's going to later hold a pencil. The scrubbing and the washing and the polishing is all freeing the child's upper arm and strengthening that. They will need that for stamina with writing. In the completion year, practical life is all about solving problems. Here we have, I alluded to it earlier, a child who's polishing right above in the left side, polishing a brass object. Well, younger children, again, remember, they're not polishing because they might think, or they might say, I'm going to make this shiny. But in reality, a lot of times they may polish it, apply the polish, wait a minute, let it dry, rub it off, and they might put polish on again. And somewhere in their repetition, they might stop before it's really fully all removed. And so that's where the older children come in. They see a beautiful shiny brass carousel pony covered in white chalky polish that's dried and abandoned. And they now realize, I have skills I can use to make that shiny. We don't want our carousel ponies to look all chalky and white. We want them to be golden and shiny. So he gets out the dishwashing work and realizes he can now use that activity to solve a problem. This does wonders for their confidence. Nobody tells them to do that. When they realize on their own that they have a solution that they know, it is much more meaningful than when we tell them to do it. So they're solidifying the purposes of the activities, real practical life experience and skills. At the core of the practical life area is all about how we address daily problems with practical solutions. It's right in the name. Because they weren't aware of this when they were using the activities when they were younger, when they apply them to the spontaneous problems they observe, they experience it as a revelation, a discovery that they made. They use their self-care, care of the environment, and grace and courtesy skills to solve problems and when they are needed, versus previously being motivated by imitation and developmental drives. Sometimes their activities are intentionally to benefit the whole community. Here, a child is serving banana slices. In these pictures, the child who is preparing pizza is in her completion year, and she's doing the whole activity from start to finish. She's reading the recipe, she's making the dough. There's a lot of science going on in the fermentation and activating the yeast. And we talk about how exciting it is to make sure they're awake and they're blowing bubbles, and we fed them their food, the sugar. And now we can add them to the carefully measured flour. And of course, she gets a whole audience who's excited because at the end of the morning, everyone's going to get a slice of the pizza with their lunch. They may excel in a particular type of practical life exercise, immersing themselves in projects that take hours to days to complete, such as embroidery, woodwork, and sometimes baking. And then get all of their admirers to assist them with the big cleanup. Nobody asked these children to do that. They were just waiting for the opportunity to help with the process of making the pizza that day. Their version of helping was using their practical life skills of sweeping up the flour. The types of exercises they pursue may involve elements of reading, writing, math, and science, and sometimes high levels of responsibility that must be earned. The freedom to use sharp or hot tools. In this picture, this was in my classroom, one of the children in their completion year was making waffles, and she did it from start to finish, of course, with the help of an adult around the waffle iron, but with very minimal help. And of course, we have to make sure that all the other children are safe. Sometimes there's needles for sewing. When there's woodwork available, being safe with a hammer, sometimes a saw. And then sharp knives with certain types of slicing and food prep. And in some classrooms, they do ironing too. The children will iron the placemats or other types of linens. Let's move on to sensorial. So this is a artfully done photo of one of our sensorial shelves. And this is what that area looks like. The themes in sensorial are that they offer the child keys to the world that give them improved accuracy and access to perceiving the world around them. So this is just our senses, but something about this area is going to help refine children's use of their senses. And they're in a moment developmentally where that is going to set their capacity for their life. There are the building blocks for imagination happening in this area. Movement and memory are a part of this area. There are opportunities for repetition and mastery in their activity, more indirect preparations. This is where friendliness with error comes in big time. And language, finally, is the last part. So the discovery of the child means that it is the child who is discovering. So we work really hard to protect that. And we set up a lot of different places throughout the environment where there are things that a child will maybe go on a hunt for. They might be working on something in the sensorial area, and they're trying to see the relationship between, what are the colors? Here's an example of a child who's doing a color hunt. And this is a younger child. He has mastered, matching the colors, and now knows the name, and now he's going to go on a hunt and try to remember that he's looking for something pink. He's got a little rock that's next to the pink tablet, a little hard to see. He walks and he's carrying his tray all around the children's house. He's got a purpose. This is a 3-year-old, and holding a purpose in his mind away from the activity is a big challenge as he moves through a busy classroom where there's lots of other movement going on and people having conversations and people doing interesting things. And he's got to remember he's hunting for something pink. And he can choose anything that's pink that no one else is using at the moment. And he doesn't even need to have had a lesson on it. So that's kind of a fun freedom that happens with this activity. And he chooses the silicone heart. He sets it next to the pink tablet, and then he'll move his memory marker to another color and begin it again, hunting for a different color. So if we were to step in and say, oh, this is pink, oh, this is orange, it's no longer the child's discovery. So it's really important that adults recognize when a child is working to let it be their work. This is hard because we see it as an opportunity to connect with the child when actually we end up usurping their discovery. And when we do allow for this discovery to happen, the joy that the child has is remarkable. Here's an example of some children in my classroom in the past who were spontaneously discovering the relationship between the sandpaper land and water forms that they had used, and that, oh my goodness, there are these picture cards that have real land and water forms too, and we can put them together and they match. And they had done this on their own, and I had been in a lesson, and they came over. We have to show you something, Miss Emily. They called me. We have to show you something, Miss Emily. We found something. We found something. We want to show you. And when I came to see it, this is how they looked. The top two on the left were just brimming with joy, and the one on the right is telling me a whole story about it. And of course, I had planted that in the environment intentionally, but they were the ones who pulled it together in their own time. And for them, it was a true discovery. And I acted impressed and surprised. Wow, you guys found these are the same. And look, you matched them all. And oh, here's the peninsula. And this is a peninsula too. And so it was just really fun for them. All right, we are also refining the accuracy of a child's sense perception of the world around them. We'll see a little bit more how that works, and building friendliness with errors and problem solving. Here's a quote from Dr. Montessori. Again, you can pause it and read it. Basically, she talks about how it's really important that we provide experiences for children that give them the feedback of their own mistakes versus having to tell them or have them wait until an adult's available to come check and see if they got it right. We trust that they, if they're given the right tools, they're going to do that on their own. They're little scientists. So how do we do that? The materials in this area specifically have controls of error built in. There are a few other places where that happens in the environment, in practical life, language, and math. And in practical life, there's a lot of natural consequences, which are the control of error, as we talked about glass objects. If they break, that is the message that you get, that there was something happening that you could have done differently to prevent that, but They learn that through their experience versus us telling them. In sensorial, these different puzzles and games that help them refine their senses have 3 different types of controls of error. So there's mechanical, which means it doesn't fit. That's what we're seeing here on the right. There's a perceptual control of error, and the last one is the last pair doesn't match. So mechanical means that if it's correct, it fits, and if it's incorrect, it doesn't fit. On the left, we're seeing a child working with a material called the trinomial cube. And basically, it's got a lot of little pieces. You take it apart, and now you have to rebuild the cube inside the box. If you do it correctly, those 2 little flaps on the side will close, and the lid will fit. That's how you know you got it correct. If one of the pieces is not placed properly, you won't be able to close the box, and the lid will not fit. Also, our puzzle maps, they're mechanical. They have a mechanical control of error. If you put all the pieces in and you can't fit the last one, then that means something isn't in the right place. So oftentimes the children will instinctually take it apart and do it again. So in this way, it sort of supports them in getting it right over time and repeating till they do. Here's an example of perceptual control of error. So if you did it right, it looks right. And if you did it not quite right, or something isn't in the right place, it doesn't. And a lot of times, brand new 2.5 and 3-year-olds won't see any problem if the pink tower looks like this. They may even try some other wild and wacky combinations in which the tower keeps toppling over, but you'll see with determination, they keep rebuilding it. And once they get it to look just right, they're so happy. And of course, the older children we have to teach them not to interrupt, because they see that and it's an assault on their sense of order. We have to reassure them that that child is going to figure it out. We have to let them, even though it's still that child's work to do. The last kind of control we use in this area is called the last pair doesn't match. So the way we say it to the child is, you got it right when the last 2 match. So we're looking at the bells here. These are each of the materials in the sensorial area are a concrete materialization of some aspect of the senses. So with the auditory sense, we have the ability to sense pitch, which is what the bells represent. We also have the ability to sense volume and timbre. Timbre is a little harder because that's like my voice belongs to Emily Westberg, and someone else's voice, you may know when you hear it, belongs to a different person, and who that person is. That's timbre. With pitch, we have the middle C scale. And so each of the brown bells have a tone, da, 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 da. And they have a white partner that has the tones, da, 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 da. The white bells stay in their homes, and we mix up the brown bells. And then you have to try to match where they go, which brown bell goes with each white bell, by listening, by playing with the little mallet that's on the right there. And then there's a little mute that helps you to stop the sound so you can listen to the next bell that you play. And when you think you found 2 tones that sound the same, you put them together. Well, at the end, when you've gone through matching all of them, if your very last brown bell matches the very last white bell, you know you got it correct. If they don't match, that means somewhere in your bells there is a mistake. There's one that isn't with its correct partner. And so then they can take them apart and match them again. Sometimes children have had enough of it and they'll just leave it mismatched, and then an older child will come along and notice and correct it. But a lot of times they'll go back and mix them up and try to find the correct matches. Here are some more examples of that. So we have a lot of matching in this area. We'll go from the top first. So the middle top photo is smelling jars. So there might be some rosemary in one of the blue and pink, some lavender, and maybe lemon. And the child is now smelling, and they have to match the pink jar to the blue jar that smells the same. So they look the same. The only thing that's different is the scent. So it really zones in and puts a spotlight on that quality of a sense for a child to sort of work with and get more correct over time. In the upper right corner, that's that volume I was talking about. So these are the sound boxes. There are 6 cylinders that are red and 6 that are blue. Each blue cylinder has a red partner, and they vary from very soft to clunk, clunk, clunk loud. And the child has to listen and try to find the ones that go together. And at the end, if they have a mismatch, the last 2 will not sound the same. We have color matching. Here's a brand new child doing the very first color box, just matching the primary colors. The second box has secondary colors, and then the third box has shades of color. And so it gradually gets more complex. In the bottom middle picture, the child is using her tactile sense to match fabrics that feel the same. Because you can look and see that they look different, we use a blindfold for that so that she can really zone in on the feeling. And there's another blindfold activity happening, which is using a tactile sense of the baric sense. So baric means weight. So she's weighing in her hands a mahogany tablet and in her other hand, balsam wood, which is very light. And her friend is helping her with that to make sure that she can get them into her hand just right. And of course, enjoying it. That's one of the activities they can do with a friend. I should say baric pressure is important when you're writing or if you're doing an activity like playing the piano. So these are types of movement and senses that children could use for lots of other things in the future. This child has just successfully matched the thermic tablets. So there's wool, there's wood, there's steel, and felt. And they each have a different temperature. We use our wrist to sense that, but we need to wear a blindfold because, again, you can tell just by looking at them. So you can tell she knows she did it right when she takes off her blindfold and they're all matched properly. So we have some indirect preparations that happen in this area that prepare a child's hand for writing. Anything with a knob, you can see they're holding with a pencil grip. There's indirect preparations for math in this area. Anything with 10 pieces is preparing a child's mind for the decimal system. We also have things that match exactly. So children start to see that things have relationships and they can make those discoveries on their own. The decanomial square we saw earlier, which just seems like a beautiful, lovely puzzle that grows exponentially when you build it properly, is actually preparing a child's mind for later math, such as the Pythagorean theorem, squaring and cubing work, addition and multiplication. When you put certain thinner pieces of the decanomial square together, you can make it as wide as a certain other piece. And that's sort of a preparation for addition and multiplication. But for them, it's just a fun game. And we also have the binomial and trinomial cubes. These are actually algebraic equations that have been made concrete. Dr. Maria Montessori's son Mario created them to help demonstrate the volume of a cube. But the children just know them as really fun puzzles. But through their use with their hands and solving these problems of how to get them all in so you can close the box and it will fit, actually create pathways in their brain that later will help them to understand on a more aware level the algebra that's happening there. And you can see in the middle lower picture, these are children in a Montessori elementary program. They're going through and they're labeling what each piece represents in the formula. So children who go into elementary programs really get to carry these materials to the next level. There's also indirect preparations for trigonometry. So the children learn the names of the triangles on the left there, and then there's different new shapes that they can build by putting them together in a variety of ways. And you can see they're starting to get a little messy. These are children who will be going into first grade a few months after this. And they're curious about what did someone else make? And they're not as careful about keeping all the pieces on their rug. Those are marks that the child is getting ready to transition. And again, we'll talk more about that later. Here are some examples of the completion year, the way that the sensorial work kind of looks for the older child. So if you look on the left, this child had just gotten the lesson on the United States puzzle map. Typically, we'll only let them take out a few pieces at a time when they're starting to learn it, because you can very easily become overwhelmed and not know how to put it back together. This child insisted that he be able to take them all out with such, such confidence that the guide thought, well, let's just see what happens. And she allowed him to do it. So he took all the pieces out. He put them all back together. He took it apart again. He put it back together. And without being prompted, he went and got a rug. He carried the empty puzzle frame to the other rug and proceeded to build the United States of America map from one end of the house to the other end of the house, carrying one piece at a time. And he did this multiple times, and he did it again the next day and the next day. So these are things that if we had told him to do that, he likely would not have completed, or completed with that level of excitement and wanting to do it again and again, and that level of challenge. But because he was able to choose his own activity, he really surprised us. The child in the middle is finding different ways to put the materials together and really having fun with it. And then a lot of times those older children will say, this is a ship, or this is something else. They're starting to see and use elements of their imagination. And if you might recognize what's happening on the rug on the right, it looks very much like the Pink Tower. Now, I could tell that child, those match exactly to the Pink Tower because they've been carefully procured, and everything in this area has exact, measurements so that you can make this discovery. And so just try getting the Pink Tower and see. But you can see she's already sort of made that discovery by putting all three of them, the three different colors, together that way. So I mentioned the building blocks of imagination. Before we go into what that means, I think we should come to agreement about the definition of imagination. A lot of times people mix up imagination with fantasy, and there's nothing wrong with fantasy. It is something our human minds do, and we enjoy it. Thinking about things like Disney and characters and all the fun stories that happen. It's a wonderful part of being human and entertainment. However, it is different than true imagination. So, looking at the definition of imagination, it is the faculty or action of forming new ideas or images or concepts of external objects that are not present to the senses. It's something that's happening internally, and it is a vision almost in the brain that's happening where you can see it in your mind. So here we have a 3-year-old who is working with the cylinder blocks. He doesn't have the capacity yet to imagine. He is using his hands and his senses to come to know the cylinder block in many different ways. These are older children here on the right. Now they've already mastered being able to take apart and put back together the cylinder block using their vision. Now they're starting to, you can see in the front here, this child is using her hand to feel where it goes, but then she's with her other hand having to feel a cylinder that's as wide as that opening. And in some way or another, there is some imagination happening there. She's having to sort of use her sense of touch and feeling to visualize the dimension that's happening and find the partner. This material really illustrates this concept of imagination. So these 3 children are going into their completion year, and they have all had practice on their own, lessons with the guide of the geometric solids. These are those 3-dimensional figures. So there's a sphere, there's a cube, there's a cone, there's a cylinder, and many more objects. They all know each object, they know how it feels, they know the name of it. And now, because they have that knowledge, they get to play a game together. And anybody who plays this game has to know all the names and have already worked with the materials previously. The way they play it is they put all the pieces into the basket and they cover it so no one can see what's inside. They take turns. One child at a time reaches into the basket under the cloth and describes the object to the other children. And then he or she will have to guess what it is. So he's reaching in, he might be saying, I'm feeling something flat. Oh, and when I turn it, it's flat again. And when I turn it, it's flat again. And oh, there's kind of a pointy corner on it. Oh, there's another pointy corner. I think, and before he guesses it, the other children now have all had an opportunity to sort of imagine what could he be touching? We already know this concrete object. We've already created that sort of abstraction in our mind of what it is away from the object. And now by hearing a description of it, that can trigger an idea in my mind. I can see in my mind what it might be. They may already know what he's going to pull out. And he may already kind of have an idea. He guesses, I think it's the cube. Now he pulls out the cube from underneath the cloth. And when everyone sees that it's a cube, it is an eruption of joy and laughter. They have been able to see it before they could actually see the concrete object. They've seen it in their mind. This is a source of immense joy for the children. And so that is true imagination. When we say abstraction, that's what we're talking about. That was cubeness. They had an abstraction of cubeness in their mind. And now they reach in, they can feel it, and it's really fun. And so they go around, they take turns doing that for each of the objects. Abstraction is a theme that we're going to be revisiting. Another child in his completion year had worked with all of the puzzle maps and created his own extension of how he wanted to play a game with them. He got out all the maps and he took out all the pieces and put them all on a few rugs, and they were all mixed up. All the countries and states were mixed up in a piece of, I don't even know how many pieces that would be. But he laid out the frames on rugs further away on the other side of the house and went through and found each piece and put it where it went. Nobody would ever tell a child to do this. This is, I don't think there are many adults who could succeed in this. And this was his choice, and he completed it, amazing everyone. Children will explore the same materials, but now they're going to do it through reading and writing and in new combinations. We saw some of the new combinations already. Language is the final piece that solidifies an abstraction or an image in the mind. And so this is the work of the older children. They're going back to those materials that they had experienced in a concrete sensorial way, and now they're learning the names. They might be tracing and making books or drawing. They might be matching and building words with the movable alphabet. This child was working on the botany cabinet, which has like the essential leaf shapes you need to know as a botanist in plant identification. And she knew the names, and now she's sounding them out. Hastate, ovate, reniform, ace rose. And she's creating a book to take home. So here's some of that making a product that starts to happen. You start to see more evidence of what has already been going on for 3 years coming home. The children will start to explore the relationships between the things using materials from multiple areas to do research. So each of these mushroom types of activities were in different places in the room. And this child had, taken the mushroom for polishing and brought it to her table. Then she went and got the real polypores and was looking at those and the mushroom identification book, and then the parts of a mushroom cards. And you can only see a little bit of the corner, but there's also types of fungi. And so she's pulling all of that together. Nobody told her, go get all the mushroom things from around the room. She just has them around her, and she's reading about mushrooms as she does her research there. Obviously, through all their work with the materials of this area, they increase their exactness. The control of error has helped them to see where they had mistakes. They've been able to fix them on their own. And as true imagination is dawning, they have access to the building blocks that have solidified clear abstractions of the qualities of their world in their mind. So here we have an older child in his completion year. He has already matched all the bells. He knows how to put them in order, to sequence them in the to mix them all up and then just sequence them without their partners. And now he's composing. He's writing his own songs. Let's move on to the language area. So again, this is a lot we're covering, but I feel like it's important for people to understand all that's happening within each area to really understand the importance of that third year, sometimes fourth year, because the child needs that opportunity to fully pull everything together. And if they're not given that opportunity, in the way that the child who is working on let's go back here, on the shapes of the leaves. She might have felt the leaves and she knew how to match them into their little puzzle frame. But to be able to learn their names and pull it together, now she can access that in her mind. Without learning the language, it's just sort of kind of a sense that she has. When she knows the name, there's something about that part of the brain being pulled into the game, if you will, that now makes it accessible. And so it's an important step in them being able to use this learning and this knowledge. Some themes in language. So again, more indirect preparations that lead toward reading, writing, and having ideas about what to write about. Language is a living, ever evolving process. We see this with generations. There's new words coming out all the time and new ways that the next generation will invent to connect and share ideas. It's the longest sensitive period in human development. It spans multiple eras, but the majority of it is happening in the first plane from 0 to 6. And you can just see that evidenced by you can put a baby anywhere in the world and they're going to learn the language. So it is an important formative experience in our development. Exposure to language and using it both connect many different areas of the brain, as well as develop different areas of the brain. So there is both passive and active language happening at the same time. Both of those kinds of things are actually creating development in the brain and in other parts as we use our mouth and ears and so on. Adults strive to never give more to the mind than to the hand. This is an interesting principle because we sometimes don't always know how much to share with a child or what kind of things to share with a child. Um, when it comes to language, we want them to, well, really all of the areas, we want them to first have a concrete experience because experience needs to precede language for a child to really understand it, which is evidenced by the sensorial area. So, again, with those leaf shapes, the child is feeling, tracing, matching them to their place in the puzzle. They're having an experience with it. They might have the experience of carrying the hastate around and finding the plant inside the children's house that has leaves that match that. That's another kind of sensorial experience. And then learning the name of it comes later. And so this is really true of all children's experience. We strive to let them have the experience first and then to name it, to show them how to carry a chair, and then to say, this is how you carry a chair. This is an important quote. We are going to read this one. The quality of inner work may be immense, yet the outer signs of it are often small. This means there's a great disproportion between the powers of expression and the inner work that the child is doing. It's also found that visible progress does not go gradually or in a straight line, but in jumps. We sometimes call them explosions. Here are some of the goals that we're working toward in the language area. Total authorship. Children develop the capacity to convey their own thoughts in written form that others can understand. That's a goal. We're not just trying to learn the ABCs. We want you to be able to share your ideas. And children have wonderful, amazing gifts of ideas when they have the tools to express them. It is my favorite thing as a guide. We're also working toward total reading for them to understand that communication from someone else, written words, have meaning. One of the earlier lessons is through, well, we do a lot of spoken language, but the sound game is just a fun kind of a version of I Spy, where we'll select different objects that have different sounds in them. And then we'll get a little group of children together and we'll say the names of each thing. There's a pan, there's a pitcher, there's a mug, there's a cat, there's a plate, there's a fish, there's a block, there's a clock, there's a hat, there's a fan. I'm thinking of something. And when you hear your name, you can guess what it is. I'm thinking of something that starts with F. What is it? John. And now John takes a swing at it, his best guess. Maybe he's a pro at this and he knows right away it's fan. So we might ask him to say the sounds in order. Can you say the sounds of that word fan in order? And if he, again, is a pro, he'll say f, a, n. For another child, we might say, okay, I'm thinking of something that starts with k and ends with k. What is it? Now the child has to look at all the objects, think of their names, think of the ones that start with k, and then find one that starts with k and ends with k. And we say, okay, what is it? Jenny. Clock. Yes, the cat ends with t, k, at, and clock ends with k. So that's kind of a synopsis of this. This actually helps the guides to assess how a child is hearing language, if they're able to hear the phonemes, which are the units of sound, which is basically each sound, like p, a, t. Those are each a phoneme. 3 different sounds go into that. And if they can hear all the sounds in order, that's a clue that they may be ready for the movable alphabet. We try our best to expose children to highly curated, high quality, developmentally appropriate language. We do this in everything, every possible bit of language that they are exposed to in the children's house. The quality of the books. There are a lot of children's books that are really not appropriate for young children. They either have rude language, they have just kind of dumbed down explanations of things, or they have things that are, too abstract for young children. You see sometimes, books kind of marketed to 3 and 4-year-olds that are about elementary school experiences. Those children don't have that experience. It's not going to be very meaningful to them. So choosing books carefully is like finding a needle in a haystack. Probably about I would say I don't know, a very, very small percentage of what you find at the library is actually going to be appropriate for young children. The songs we sing, the poems that we do, we tell true stories about real but developmentally appropriate things, such as how I made spaghetti last night. We try to use language a child would understand. I opened the cupboard and I found the medium-sized pot. I put it on the stove and turned on the faucet in my sink. I caught the water with a measuring pitcher and I filled it to 2 cups of water. I turned off the faucet and I poured my water into the pot. I turned on the stove and felt it start to get warm. I knew I would have to be careful because that gets very hot. I don't want to touch that. Then I got out the pasta. I waited until I could see the steam rising from my pot and hear the sound of the bubbles boiling inside before I poured my hard, crunchy pasta into the hot, boiling water, and so on. We give them true stories that match what they can observe in the world and the conversations we have with children, too. So we have kind of two tracks that the materials that aid writing go in. We have one track where we're preparing and supporting children's hand for writing, and then where we're preparing and supporting their minds for writing, having ideas and things to write about and express. So the sandpaper letters are tactile. They create muscle memory as we show the child how to trace them. We show them how to trace them in the way that they will write them. And they need to use a light touch to stay on the rough of the sandpaper letter. That also gives them sort of a control of error for when they're writing a k, in order to stay in that shape. The movable alphabet is a wonderful tool because children really they struggle with making their letters look just right, trying to remember the shapes and the sound at the same time. That's almost an obstacle to them being able to express what they're thinking. The movable alphabet frees their hand from that challenge and their mind from trying to focus on creating the right shapes for the sounds and just focus on expressing your idea. So if the child knows the letter sounds and what they look like, and they're able to sound out the different parts of a word, then we introduce them to the movable alphabet. And here we have one child doing a list of animals, and then another child doing a specific list of animals who live in the Arctic. And they're older, so they're first building the words, and now they're getting to kind of create the book, that product that comes home. Chalkboards are wonderful for children. They give immediate feedback. They're different than markers, let's say, or even a whiteboard. They're building strength. And the children use them for just drawing, as we see on the big chalkboard over on the left. Then you can practice writing your numbers, or you could practice writing letters too. Maybe one day you'll be able to write your name on the chalkboard or write words that you built with the movable alphabet. The metal insets are another wonderful material that help prepare children's hand for writing. This is the first time we introduce children to a pencil. We are very careful with how we introduce children to pencils. We want to make sure that they establish good mechanics of how they're holding their pencil with the proper grip. That's going to be very helpful for them in their stamina and in their ability to write letters and express themselves. But this material is more about art and kind of geometry and color, and it's beautiful. There is a progression of different lessons that we show that sort of move with the child as their hand is evolving toward writing. And they are called the metal insets. A lot of times children report them as the metal insects. Finally, we'll let them write with a pencil. When we can see that they know the letter sounds, that they've had lots of practice with metal insets, lots of practice writing on the chalkboard, now they'll get to use a pencil to write things. And you can see one of our graduates here drew a picture of our East building. Again, with that goal of being total authorship, being able to express whatever you're thinking. We have a child here who wrote a story, first built it with the movable alphabet, and then the writing of it takes much longer. So being able to first get the idea out and then put it onto paper is sort of the order of things. So she wrote phonetically, once upon a time, there was a little girl. She loved eating chocolate cookies. She didn't want, and then after I took the picture the next day, she added, to ever stop. I just thought I would show you the actual writing here too. Another child in their completion year, they get very reflective, those older children, especially as they're getting closer to 7 years old, if they're with us, if they're lucky enough to be with us that long. This child was writing a chapter book and writing about their life. So when I turned 2 years and 11 months old, then I started at Sunborn. We don't typically encourage conversation about Santa. We leave that kind of a thing for at home. But of course, the children bring in stories about their experience. And these completion year graduates, we're talking about it, and we just happened to find some Dear Santa letter paper in the Target dollar bins. So we thought we'd share it and just see what happens, not telling them anything about what they should write. We just said, if you would like to do this today, we have this special paper. And here's what they wrote. Dear Santa, I love your presents. Thank you, Kyle. And another child wrote, Dear Santa, I wish you a merry flight. You bring lots of joy. Love, Henry. This really struck me. The children, as they're moving into their next plane of development, as they're getting ready to graduate, they have that deep sense of empathy. Think about what, when I was a child, if we were writing a letter to Santa, it was all about what we want, a list of ideas he can give me for gifts. This is gratitude that these children are expressing. It's very beautiful. So when we have children, when we're working toward reading, there are a few different goals here. We want them to be able to understand what they're reading, and there's a lot there that needs to be worked on in English. To be able to decode our language is very tricky. So that we spend a lot of time on helping them to learn the keys to be able to do that. Then there's another aspect to reading. It's interpretation. What does this mean? How did this person feel? And then an appreciation of style. One children's author is going to write something that's going to feel different than another children's author, and be able to appreciate that. This is really important. We commonly misunderstand this about children because as adults, we're just living in our adult mind. Even older children have a similar mind to us, but the younger children, they have a different reason for reading. So whereas we might read to learn something new or to get immersed into a story of fiction that kind of takes us away into this other world or someone else's experience. The young children are reading to affirm what they already know. So they don't really necessarily want to read or enjoy as much reading about brand new content, the most extreme thing, or something totally new and different and unknown, unfamiliar. So the content we procure for them to read reflects familiar experiences as well as offers them windows into the experiences of other children their same age. Again, trying to expose them to highly curated, high quality, developmentally appropriate language in everything that we do. So English, again, we mentioned, has lots of funny rules. So we start with, and children seem to naturally evolve from the sandpaper letters and the movable alphabet into phonetic reading. We start there, and that's tricky because you really have to know what each phonetic sound is to generate words that are only phonetic, which an early reader needs that practice to solidify that and build confidence before moving on to some of the other funny rules of English. This child is working on reading verbs, action words, and he gets to do each thing when he reads it. We write labels for all kinds of things. There's lots of parts of the body that are phonetic: lips, neck, I think leg was another one. So this child was reading the labels and getting to tape them on herself and having a lot of fun. The phonograms. So another part of English is that sometimes you put two different letters together and they make a new sound. So a child might learn, here we have somebody tracing the letters. I'll use the phonetic sounds, how we describe it to the children. E and R. You have E and R, and you put them together and they make a new sound. So now we have We have to learn that when you put those two together, they can make a new sound, and then t and h make th. And so when we trace it, we say th, like cloth and thank you. On the right, we have a child using the movable alphabet to explore what kind of words have this particular phonogram in them. Chile and cheese, she's already come up with. Now let's add another layer. So those phonograms that you've learned, and you know all 16 of them now now that you've learned all of those, I have to let you know sometimes they look different and they still make the same sound. So we call those the alternate spelling. And here a guide has made these lovely alternate spelling packets and put together the sounds that make the different combinations that make the same sound. And this child has mixed them all up and is sorting them. So one example of this would be they learn that when you put at and it together, it makes the sound a. That's the first layer. When they know that and they've had practice, we add some difficulty and complexity. Now, sometimes a looks like a, hey, or it might look like sleigh or break. And so there might be a whole book of just words that have the AY or the EIGH version, and they get practice with that. Then sometimes, no matter how much you know, how many phonograms you know, and alternate spellings you know, and phonetic sounds you know, there are some words that don't make any sense. You cannot decode them. You just have to learn how to memorize them. And so this child in his completion year is now memorizing these sight words. Another kind of practice they get with reading, a way that they can really dive into many different topics. We have lots of different subjects in our 3-part cards, and we rotate them to kind of keep it fresh. A child can match the labels. So they'll set out just the picture, and then they'll match the labels. And then at the end, they can check to see if they got it right by putting the control cards next to what they've matched and see if they read it correctly and matched it correctly. So they do this in lots of different ways. Younger children, when they start reading, they'll do it with familiar things. And now this older child here, he is reading 3-part cards to teach himself new things. So now he might start by reading the control cards and then kind of give himself a quiz and a challenge by having to match the names to these famous paintings and the different themes of the paintings. We can do all kinds of fun things with language. So this child was in my classroom. We'd been reading Little House books by Laura Ingalls Wilder. And so I had put together a little bag of objects that are written about in the books. And this older child is practicing. And these words all have combinations of, there's sight words, there's phonograms, and so on. And so she's getting lots of practice just for fun in a way, and has a whole audience, of course. These younger children are getting to see this child loving reading. Same child again. She's playing a game within our functions of words. So the functions of words are different games that have sort of a format that we'll do. They often involve something silly and fun, but every sort of lesson brings attention to and the way that a certain type of speech functions. So in this game, she's playing the logical adjective game. The first way we play it is there's a list of nouns and a list of adjectives, and each one has sort of a clear logical partner. So like cold popsicle, playful puppy, and they read all of the nouns and then they find the right adjective that goes with it. This is a second adjective type of game. They've already had some other experience with it, and now she's doing an extension where she's seeing how many adjectives can she put with one noun. And she has put together this list, and her friends are being entertained by her work right now. Fast, hard, helpful, cold, bright, big popsicle. Another aspect of these games are that we'll start with the label put together. For the conjunction, it's a very long label because we keep adding more to it. So we start with a green pencil, and the child goes and gets a green pencil. And then we put another word, another few words, a red pencil, and the child goes and gets a red pencil. And then we write a pink pencil, and they go and get the pink pencil. And now we take a pink ribbon and we tie it together. We have the child read it. What does that say? A green pencil, a red pencil, a pink pencil. And we ask, is that true? most of the time they will instinctively, just from their experience with language, say a green pencil and a red pencil, and we'll catch them. Wait now, I heard you add a word there. What was that word you said? And they're usually not even aware they said it. You said a green pencil and a red pencil. Is that what it says on my slip that says a green pencil, a red pencil, a pink pencil? No, we have to add a word. So we cut, we write, and we write it in red to bring attention to it. And then we have to tape it in. And then they reread it now. It says a green pencil and a red pencil, a pink pencil. Is that right? We have to do it again. We have to cut, we have to add. So the act of cutting brings attention to it. The seeing it in a different color, and then at the very end we symbolize. There is a fun part that will mix up the words, and it might say and a red pencil, a green pencil, a pink pencil. And does that make sense? And they move around the words until it seems to make sense to them, and they love that it sounds silly and it's not what it actually is, which again brings their attention to what is a conjunction? A conjunction is a word that ties different things together. And so we symbolize it. They see a pattern in English. It's really neat because other languages might have a different pattern, and they move through learning all the different kind of grammar in that way. In Montessori Elementary, they really go into detail with this. Another layer that the older child is working on once they're reading and they've had all of that other experience. Not everybody gets this far in the Children's House, but this is carrying over again into elementary. But we can do this. If a child has moved through the curriculum and they're ready for this, we have the materials, we know how to present it, and this is reading analysis. So now we start to look at, how does this relate to each other? We see that hear and march and sniff, which are verbs, action words. And the little tiny blue triangle, those are articles, words that tell us if it could be any sound or it's a particular sound. And the nouns, the big black triangle. So they're reading some labels here. Taste the bread, hear the sound, march the colors, or match the colors, sorry, and sniff the flower. And they're symbolizing that. On the left, that's really getting into detail. So they might have a slip with a sentence on it that says, the white rabbit was talking to Alice and hurried nervously, something along those lines. And so the arrows have different questions. So who was talking? And you find the arrow that points to the white rabbit. And who was he talking to? He was talking to Alice. And what was he doing? He was hurrying. And how was he doing it? Nervously. They also get to act out those words too. So there's kind of a layer of drama. And then just further experience. So these would each be a separate cutout piece. So pretty would be its own label, ugly would be another one, or those are antonyms, words that mean the opposite of things. So you would set up the list, sad, sick, fast, and then you'd get out your other lighter green and try to match them to whichever one is the opposite. There's adult and young animal matching, and then collective nouns, which I think are really fun. A kaleidoscope of butterflies, an army of ants, a scourge of mosquitoes. They start to really love words and all the different ways they can express things. So it's just another fun way to give them more experience with reading, but it's fun. So in their completion year, their momentum in learning to read and write is undisturbed. If they stay for the completion year, it's not interrupted by a major transition in schools or teacher or classmates or routine. They've moved from the concrete to abstraction. They started moving beyond simple object recognition to understanding more complex concepts and relationships between words. That's that reading analysis and word study we looked at. And function of words. They have had many opportunities to practice at their level of work in a variety of interesting and relevant ways. They've had opportunities to apply their skills in new ways, including in other activities like reading a recipe or doing math problems. Later, they might read, math problems and then have to figure out what kind of operation they're going to need to use to solve that. There are activities that offer children opportunities to work with others in this area. And they appeal to the emerging second plane child's budding empathy, love of drama, and need for justice and rules. We're going to skip, well, I hate to skip it. This is just going to be a very long training. So I'm going to go ahead and play this. This is a play I did. I apologize for both the movement of the camera and the sound. It was during the pandemic, and we did a little play outside, me and some of my older children. So just kind of bear that in mind. I'm by myself with the children doing this to share with the parents.
Slinky Malinky in Cat Flaps by Lindley Dodd. Performed by the Blue Butterflies. The house was asleep, it was silent and still, with flickering shadows on ceiling and sill. Slinky Malinky was cozy and snug, curled in a ball on the raggedy rug. He opened an eye, inspected his toes, and washed from his tail to the tip of his nose. He wiped round an ear with a delicate paw, and stretched as he silently slipped through the door. Whiskers all twitching and eyes shining bright, he squeezed through the cat flap and into the night. He prowled round the garden and smelled every smell, from the rambling rose to the snail in its shell. Then, with a curious questioning call, he sprang to the top of the tumble-down wall. "Meow," he called. Out of a bush at the end of the wall came two creeping shadows, one big and one small. Slipping and slithering, scrambling down, were Graywhack Jones and Butterball Brown. Next to the hole by the tunnel house door, furtively lurking, were two shadows more. Up through the leaves of the five-finger tree climbed Pimpernel Pug and Mushroom McGee. Down on the grass, by the cucumber frame, mysterious figures were playing a game. They tumbled and chased, with a scuffle and cuff, the Papadum Kittens and Grizzly McDuff.
Miss Emily, I shouldn't call because I'm allergic to grass.
Yeah, you can walk then. That's a good idea. From nooks and from crannies, from mischief and game, from every corner and crevice they came. They sat in the moonlight's silvery glow, hobnobbing happily, 10 in a row. But out of the hedge by the rickety seat, disturbing the birds in their feathery sleep, something was sneaking on pussyfoot paws. The cranky and crotchety Scarface Claw! Then all at once came the ear-splitting sound of a caterwaul symphony echoing round. It woke all the neighbors. From windows and doors came a bellowing shout and furious roar. "Shh," they all said. "What a rackety bunch! Stop that commotion and go home at once." With a grumbling growl and a scuttle of paw, off and away galloped Scarface Claw. And down from the wall with a hiss and a spit went Slinky Malinky, lickety split. The others all followed until there were 9, walking behind in a tail-waving line. They squeezed through the cat flap, whiskers all twitching and eyes shining bright, squeezed through the cat flap and out of the night.
It's hard for me to squeeze.
was asleep, it was silent and still, with flickering shadows on ceiling and sill. Slinky Malinky was cozy and snug, with all of his friends on the raggedy rug. They sat in the firelight's welcoming glow, hobnobbing happily, 10 in a row. Yay, bravo! Excellent performance, Blue Butterflies.
And that is the end. We're going to take a little break here. And we'll be back shortly. Well, hopefully you enjoyed that little presentation of one of our favorite books in the classroom. And oops, we're going to go to a different window here. Let's see. Hang on just a second. I went to the wrong place after the break. There we go. Okay. So you can just see how we can take a story that the children love and bring it to life. The older children have everything in place to be able to really enjoy that and get the most out of it. So let's see if I can continue on to our next. I'm having a little issue. I may have to leave and come back. I'm going to try that. Okay. Give me just a moment. I apologize for this. We're going to be shifting into math next. So kind of a natural break between them. Oops.
Slinky Malinky in
We don't want to see that again. Okay, here we go. Okay, I am going to just double check one thing that we have everything in the correct view and head back in to where we were. Thank you for your patience. Hopefully you have had a minute to take a little break, and we'll start on math. So similar to the way that written language evolved from a need to communicate, math was born of a human need to make sense of our experience. And both written language and math are part of the human culture. It means that it's learned from other humans, other people, rather than innate. And we don't have necessarily the drives to create these specific things. We do have an inner drive to want to communicate, and there is a human tendency to make sense of our experience. Another fun fact is that all mathematical discoveries were initially born of concrete experience. And then, of course, if you get into the really wild quantum physics, we get into not so much concrete, but the majority, especially in the early evolution. So children kind of follow that same path of learning that history kind of evolved over time. So in Montessori education, because formal math is a human creation versus innate, some of us might stumble more on it and find it difficult than others. And so we seek to help children to learn and understand this by analyzing those difficulties, those places where we stumble. So we isolate those in each of the materials. We provide concrete materials for each of them, and then each of those illustrates a path toward how you navigate that difficulty and how to understand it. So you can keep learning. In math, so far, we have already helped prepare children's minds, hands, and bodies for learning through all of their previous experiences with us that supported their ability to concentrate, encouraged them to navigate problems through the controls of error, built impressions into their neural pathways through their work with the sensorial materials and experiences. And we are now building upon that earlier experience. So here's an example of a sensorial material a child would encounter in their first year. The red rods, they are a concrete abstraction of length. The only thing that changes about them is length, and they change by an exact measurement of 1 unit, and they get longer by that exact measurement as you go. Now, since that groundwork has been laid through the children's hands, they've already been able to put them in order. They've felt how long they are. They carry them one at a time through the busy classroom. And just by feeling and seeing how long they are, they now have an abstraction for length. And now we're going to take and build on that. Now we're going to add quantity. So once a child knows already the symbols, the numbers, we will add those to the number rods. And each one of those is exactly like the red rods, except that now we can see with the blue how long they are. So they count, they match the number cards, and then there's actually some fun impressions we can do with those number rods that lead kind of prime the pump for them to understand things like addition, subtraction, multiplication. So once we get them all lined up, we might say, okay, what can we add to 9 to make it as long as the 10 rod? We take the 1, we put it with the 9. They get an impression of 9 and 1 makes 10. Now what can we add to 8 to make it as long as 10? Let's try the 2. The 8 and the 2 make 10. And we continue that all the way to what can we add to the 6? We can add a 4. 6 and 4 makes 10. Now, what can we take away from 10 to leave 6? We could take the 4 away. 10 take away 4 leaves 6. Here's some more ways that, again, those impressions from sensorial are related to the math area. These are our counting chains. They are an impression of squaring and cubing and multiplication. And all of that was sort of set up by the decanomial square. The 1,000 chain, when it gets done, that can go from one side of the house to the other. And the children are counting each bead on that very wide golden chain you see hanging there. And every time they get to 100, they put one of the 100 squares above that. There are little arrows that they read the numbers and put them where they go. And then at the end, when they've gotten 10 hundreds worth of counting, they stack those tens and they get the 1,000 cube, and they can see that long chain that goes from one side of the house to the other, that is 1,000, actually is inside that cube. So our materials are hands-on. They make those abstract concepts clear to the child. Here, that child from earlier who was giving the spontaneous lesson on the decimal system, golden beads, to the younger child, showed him, feel how heavy this 1,000 is. Put it over your head. And he showed him first, and then he handed it to the child, and the child got that same experience. We honor children's natural aptitude for order and exactness. They are drawn to these activities. In fact, it's kind of hard to keep them away from them, even from the time they start. We want them to get the other experiences of the other areas of the classroom. And once we finally get into the math, they are just chomping at the bit and super pumped. Like all the previous work we've done in the Children's House, the concepts are first solidified before we add new information or complexity. So once we've done lots of work with the numbers 0 to 10, and children really understand the quantity and they know the symbols, they know the numbers, then we play a game with some friends called the memory game of numbers. And they each get a little pocket that has a number inside, and they secretly peek at their pocket, their little number, and they have to remember what number is in their pocket. They have to hold it in their mind. They can't tell anybody. And then, we invite them to each go get those things, that many of anything from the classroom, and bring it back to the rug. And then they count all together when everybody's back. And then we all look at the number to see if they got it right. And this is a way we can solidify that they understand the concept of the number away from the number rods, away from the spindle box that we saw here, these other tools that help them to solidify it. Now they're taking that abstraction of quantity and number, and they're applying it to new things around the room. And it's really fun. They can bring anything. And they just really love this game. Here's another example of how our materials isolate the difficulty. Have you ever asked a 4-year-old to count to 20? Are they able to get 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19 correct? The teens are a place where children tend to stumble. So we illustrate, it's really just a 10 and another number. So we get the concrete 10, and then we count. That gets to 11. Now we see what 11 looks like. And we'll play a game just with 11, 12, 13. Here's 12. Point to 12. Count 11. Hold the 11. What is 13 made with? A 1 and a 3. And then when we point and we say, what is that? That's 12. Oh, they got it right. We know that they're getting it. That's a little way we test. That's just a fun game. And we'll do that all the way to 19. When they've got that down, we move on to the next material on the right. This material helps them see how you get to 100. So we start with 1. Every time we get to 10 of something, it's a new category. We get another 10 and move it down. So now this child is on 41 and he just counted to 41. He's sliding the 1 in. He can see how you build a 41, what 41 looks like. Now he's going to add another little unit golden bead up there. He's going to count again, 42, move the 1, put the 2 in its place, and he can see how the numbers are built. Eventually, the older children start to realize you don't actually have to count every single one. We don't tell them. That's one of those discoveries we want them to learn. Another mark I didn't write in our development, our outlook of development, is that the older child starts to become more aware of what is efficient, and counting every single time, 41, now I have to go back and start at 0 and count to 42, isn't very efficient. It's good repetition for them, but once they learn it, they're going to realize like, oh, I can just add another unit bead and move the number over, and pretty soon we'll be at 100 before you know it. So since they're using movement to illustrate the concepts, this allows the guides to assess a child's learning. We can see, are they getting the concept? This child is playing the addition snake game, which leads them to impressions of addition, the table of addition. So every time they get to 10, they stop, they add it, they turn it into a golden snake. And it they can see, a 4 and a 6 makes 10. So they've already had some experience with that in other ways and other materials in the math area, but this is another way for them to get that same experience in a new novel way. And we can see then, are they getting it? And there is a control of error at the end of this game for them to see if they did it right. So once the children have internalized the pattern from the concrete materials, now we can start working more abstractly with their memory, adding layers that kind of add challenge, and they're using paper and pencil more. Again, kind of moving from that process to product. This is a fun quote. So if we study the works of all who have left their marks on the world in the form of interventions useful to humankind, we see that the starting point was always something orderly and exact in their minds, and that this was what enabled them to create something new. Even in the imaginative words of poetry and music, there is a basic order, so exact as to be called metrical or measured. So this is Dr. Montessori's way of kind of describing a phenomenon in the way that humans process information, and that we love order. And she called this phenomenon the mathematical mind, which isn't exactly tied directly to formal mathematics. It's kind of about that love of order, that love to make sense of things, to understand the relationship between things. And she saw it as a human tendency. Now, there's a part of me that rebels against this. And so the way I make sense of it, because I think, all the rules, but rules are important, of course, we know, and to young children, they're vital. And so for an older child, it might be more about learning the rules like a pro, so you can break them like an artist. First, you have to understand how it works, and then you can really make cool things from that. maybe you'll be breaking some of the rules, but you have to first understand what they mean, how you do it. So now let's shift to talking about how this area honors the emergent second plane child. We're going to talk about what does that mean, the second plane child, soon. But as children kind of grow and get ready for elementary school, their needs start to shift a little. And so do our materials and the way we present things to those children in their completion year. We give them, in this area in math, opportunities to exercise their reasoning that's starting to emerge, to explore the concept of fairness, fraction, divisions. These are places where that can show up. And this is like a developmental mandate from them that they need clear rules and structures. They're drawn to that. And this is also an evidence of their morality that is starting to form. That sense of fairness. That's not fair. The mathematical mind. So math honors the evolving developmental needs of the older child to have increased opportunities to work with others. Many activities in the math area are collaborative. They get to work with friends, but there's still work that they do on their own as well. So again, that idea of you have to first develop your own skills to really be able to work with others in a meaningful way. So they also get to work with the same idea in a lot of different ways. So these are different ways they work with 100. There's the 100 board where they're putting all the numbers in order. They're counting to 100 on the 100 chains, skip counting by tens. They're getting to work with the concrete golden beads here, giving a lesson on the 100 to a younger child. And they continue to move more into abstraction and internalizing what these concepts mean and use math as a tool. They might use it to for a reason. Here, this child on the right is making a calendar. He's going to keep track of the days. So starting with the golden beads in the decimal system, the children see the operations and how they work in a really sensorial way. You bring this much, your friend brings this much, and this other person brings this much, and you all are going to meet me on the rug, and we're going to put them together and see what happens. When you have this small amount, and you have this small amount, and you have this small amount, and we put them together and it makes a bigger amount, that's called addition. And now, after you've had exposure to that, then we're going to see what happens when we move to something a little bit more abstract, the stamp game. So there's still sort of a one-to-one correlation. You have a unit, you have 4 tens, you have 500s and 5,000s, and there's still some movement involved in getting to see, and you add them together, and now you're writing it on paper. Well, eventually you're going to move to being able to hold it in your mind. So the children on the right are using the finger charts, and they are reading an equation, and they are using their fingers to see, okay, 5 plus 4, and where they meet together makes 9. And now the child on the left side there, she's writing that down. 5 plus 4 equals, and the child on the bottom right corner has walked through the busy classroom, and she's saying to herself, 5 plus 4 equals 9. 5 plus 4 equals 9. And she gets all the way to where the chart is, which cannot go to your table. You have to walk through the room to check your work. And that is helping support the abstraction and the memorization, the movement. She's checking, she's looking 5 plus 4, and she sees equals 9. Her fingers moved the right way on the finger chart. She goes back and reports to her friend, who records 9. 5 plus 4 equals 9. They move on and pull a new slip. Here are some of the materials for working with multiplication. So as you can see, the child on the left, these are just really brilliant materials. She's already done the material on the right, which is working directly with the beads, taking 7 one time. So you see the rows of those white beads, there's 7 on each one. 7 taken one time is 7. 7 taken 2 times, you see now there's golden beads, is 14. 7 taken 3 times is 21. So they count how many, and then they get the equivalent in the golden beads to do that, and then they'll write it on paper on the right. Now she's, again, back to the child on the left, she is working with multiplication in a little bit more abstract way, just with the numbers there. And there are some beads that she's getting out, but there's sort of a different way a little bit quicker way to figure out what is 3 taken 5 times. So she starts with 3 taken 1 time. She puts 3 little beads in under the 1, and then she writes down the answer. 3 taken 1 time is 3. She moves her little marker over. Now she adds 3 more. 3 taken 2 times is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. She writes 6. And so it's still pretty concrete, but it's moving toward abstraction. And the next thing they'll do would be multiplication with these types of finger charts and writing down the equations that they get. They can also use the stamp game as another way that we introduce multiplication. So they're doing all of these different ways of working with the tables to memorize them. So most of these formal math presentations occur during the completion year. All of the experiences of the first years in the Children's House prepare them for learning in general, but including the formal math lessons. We don't want to introduce these earlier, as we want to make sure all the necessary experiences and preparations are in place, and then allow the children to start to internalize these concepts at the same time that they're developmentally starting to move toward abstraction, reasoning, and imagination. So these lessons and activities support the older children as they're beginning to move into their new developmental phase, as we talked about the movement toward abstraction and igniting the imagination. They're starting to see math in their minds. I wish I had had access to these materials as a child. They appeal to children's love of order and rules and fairness. They give opportunities for group work. They give opportunities to work with the same concept in a variety of ways. They appeal to their emergent reasoning, and there are opportunities throughout the environment to use math as a tool, such as to solve problems or in tandem with practical life activities. So back to our original question, why isn't a child's experience in the Children's House complete if they leave before their completion year? We have to really acknowledge that children are transitioning to the next plane of development between the ages of 6 years and 7 years, which is different from sort of mainstream's view that 5 is the time when children need to go into elementary school. So they're transitioning to the next plane of development between the ages of 6 and 7 years old, which means they have one foot in both the first and the second planes during their completion year. What exactly do you mean by planes, you might wonder? Well, Maria Montessori authored a holistic framework that describes human development from birth to adulthood based upon her lifetime of observations and the scientific study of human development. She had master's and doctorate degrees in anthropology, medicine, psychology. I feel like I'm forgetting some. I think architecture too was one of her first degrees. But she's looking at really a lot of information and then just being present with what the children were showing in front of her very eyes and looking for those patterns, working with people all over the world and specialists, and applying this approach. And there is a whole framework now that we have to look at. The main thing to know is that the planes are a series of stages. They each have their own characteristics, needs, and sensitivities that are observable. So I'm going to invite you to just pause here and read this. It's fascinating. And if you think about your own life or, just your friends, your family, your children, you will see that there is truth here. But the main thing we want to point out is that the Children's House is serving children in the second half of the first plane, the years when they're 3 to 6 years old. And that is what we call the time of functional independence. So this is a time when they want to learn about what is it, and help me do it myself. And there's a lot of growth going on physically. They're working on coordination. They are developing their sensory organs, their senses, and their capacities to sense the world, and their development of an ability to communicate. They start speech. They go from being completely dependent when they're first born to being able to express themselves and move around year 1. Lots going on. And it just continues in that way until they're about 6 years old. The way that they learn is through concrete materials and sensor and through their senses, and they're developing a core sense of being. Their personality is in formation. They mostly need to use their hands and their senses to learn. In the second plane, the child is different, and you'll notice this. That's what marks the different planes. It is a different child. The brain is different, the body is different, the motivations, they change. So the second plane child starts to emerge around 6 or 7 years old. They want to know why. You're going to hear that a lot from a 6, 7, 8 year old. And they want to know how did it get to be like that. Help me understand. They're working toward intellectual independence, whereas the younger child is just trying to be their own person. How do I take care of my body? What do I do when I'm thirsty? How do I get to the bathroom in time? How do I get dressed by myself? How can I express myself in writing? So these are functional independence tasks. The intellectual independence is more about understanding the world and making sense of it and finding their place in it in a way. They have a need for justice, a deep need for justice. That's that it isn't fair that you hear mantra. They also need empathy from the adults and the people around them. It's very upsetting to them when people don't understand what they were trying to do. Their growth is stable for the most part. They have improved stamina. They start getting in their adult teeth. They're losing teeth. They have growth spurts and growing pains, and their hair coarsens. So they're not getting as sick. They're not as impacted by pain. And intellectually, they start to be able to really vividly have imagination and abstract thought. Dr. Montessori said this is the period of the greatest capacity for intellectual learning in a human being's life. So, if that's true, are we setting children up to be successful in that time? And is our system right now honoring that? Good questions. So, children at this age are developing a conscience and a sense of morality, and their main primary mode of learning is through their mind and imagination. And we'll see, you can go on. It's very fascinating to look at the third and fourth plane too. But let's zone in on the first and second because that's where we're straddling, right? These children in their completion year have one foot in each plane. So knowing that, looking at the characteristics, looking at the social needs, which you can pause and read if you want to get into it a little bit more. Let's move on to what the role of the adult is in these different moments and their needs from their educational environment. So we pretty much know what's been going on in the children's house. We have adults who prepare the environment and maintain order. They connect the child to meaningful activities. They're working to protect the child's concentration and discoveries, help the children feel safe, physically, mentally, and emotionally, and link the children to meaningful activities around the environment in their familiar environment. There's a group of mixed age peers that's consistent all throughout Montessori education. There are materials that serve development, also consistent. Freedom of movement and exploration, the same throughout Montessori education. Natural consequences, yes. Protection, appropriate freedoms and limits, that's going to be the same all the way through. In the second plane, the role of the adult shifts. Now, instead of sort of being that adult who models for a child, connects them, and steps back and lets the child do it, the role of the adult is now to be a model of justice, is sort of a professor generalist who knows a lot about a lot of different subjects, but doesn't give the children all the answers. They model empathy and what is right and good and fair. They lead the group and they hold the group and the individuals accountable. This is that morality that needs to be honored, that's in development. They inspire curiosity by teaching the children to ask questions, just giving them enough to sort of whet their appetite, stimulate their imagination, and then send them roaring in the direction of their interest. And they link them to the resources of the environment, which are really more about just initial resources. They don't want to provide all the answers to everything in the elementary classroom. They want children to kind of reach a limit of what's available and then have to figure out how to get those questions answered outside of the classroom, because there is a need of that second plane child to expand beyond the family and the school, and to be able to see that there are resources out in society. If you want to go to the museum to get that answered, how do you do that? How do you set that up? How do you get a parent to take you? Which exhibit are you going to go to? When is it happening? And those types of things are part of their education as well. They also look at the whole of history, of human history, of geological history, and the universe. So there are no limits to what they're learning about. It is intellectually stimulating, big work. They need adventure opportunities for going out, and learning extends to the community. They need lots of access to biographies of humans who have accomplished great things and have a good sense, a good moral compass. They need to be exposed to lots of stories and biographies. They need access to physical feats and challenges. They love, again, to do hard things, and they need to be able to work with others and do things that inspire their imagination. So going back to that greatest capacity for intellectual learning, why is that relevant to the completion year? Recall that children are transitioning to the next plane of development between the ages of 6 and 7 years old, which means that they have one foot in both the first and second planes during that completion year. You need to know that the work of each plane is successive and it's unconscious. They're not necessarily aware that that is what is happening, but it is observable. So incomplete work in some area of a plane may limit progress in another plane. The future attempts to refine those missed opportunities will require conscious effort. So what needs to be in place to prepare children to make the most of their next plane, the plane with the most possibilities for intellectual development? What skills, what capacities do they need to already have built? They need to have strong executive functioning, that ability to plan, to regulate their behavior, and so on. They need to have refined their senses and have an ability to observe. They need an attitude of friendliness with error, that mistakes are our teachers, an ability to work with others and navigate conflict. They need to have motivation to learn, to be curious based on previous experiences. Is learning relevant to me? Is what you guys are saying school is and what I'm doing here, is it actually learning? Is this fun? And total reading and total authorship. We also want them to have a basic grasp of mathematic concepts. So all of these skills and capacities are still information during that completion year. This is the foundation for all future learning and development. The opportunity to become whole in the formative first plane in a familiar community with familiar environment, not wasting precious time, reorienting, is unparalleled. It is with this in mind that we strive to help you understand the importance of a child staying through their completion year. So, with that shift to the second plane comes a natural time to transition. Has your child fully transitioned from the first plane to the second? There are universal markers of this developmental shift. Like previous areas of development, they don't all happen at once. And with the goal being that a child be allowed to complete their children's house experience, let's explore what signs emerge when a child is in the second plane of development. If you're not yet convinced that your child should stay through their completion year, the upcoming questions could be helpful for you. So physical changes start to happen as a child shifts to the second plane. Ask yourself, has your child been losing teeth? Has your child been having growing pains and growth spurts in height? Has your child been getting sick less, losing roundness like their baby fat or dimpling around their hands? As second plane children become so absorbed in physical challenges that their reactions to injury tend to be initial surprise with quick recovery. Does your child have much reaction to pain when they're playing? Reasoning starts to emerge. Does your child ask questions about a concept that doesn't have a concrete explanation? Does your child remember something that she or he has experienced and then writes about it while coming up with a new idea about the experience? Does your child explore books and draw conclusions about a topic without actually seeing the subject? Does your child make up stories and then write about them? Neatness. Montessori elementary classrooms struggle with this. The second plane child tends to lose a sense of neatness and cleanliness outside of the mind as they're absorbed in new things that they're learning internally. They forget to put things away or wash their hands before starting a new activity. Is neatness a distraction rather than a necessity? While your child is engaged in a learning activity that's abstract, are they so focused on internal learning that their space is messy and they don't seem to notice the chaos? These are marks of that second plane. In the second plane, there's an expansion, a social expansion from family to society. The school and the family are not enough. The second plane child seeks to experience society and the larger world, and at times seems to want to separate themselves from their family. Does your child express a desire to explore places outside of your home and school? Does your child walk ahead of you when arriving or leaving school or other destinations? Does your child ask to visit other spaces and classrooms? This is a question you could ask your guides. Can she or he speak for themselves in new situations? Does your child seek independence from you in new situations? Again, with that expansion, going outs are built into elementary Montessori programs. We think of them as field trips in mainstream education, but in Montessori Elementary, the children really are the organizers, and they have to learn the practical life skills of how do you make this happen from start to finish. And you can see here they're doing some grocery shopping. Oh, back on this note, in the middle picture, the second plane child starts to want to talk to strangers. They are curious about meeting new people and want to know, what can I learn from this person? And while most people are safe people, not everyone is, as we know, sadly, in the world. And it is something to be aware of as a parent as your child moves into the second plane, that their boundaries around safety with meeting new people are they kind of go down. And you really have to teach them and protect them about that. There's a group instinct that emerges. So start by thinking about if your child has played any sports in their first plane of development. This is really common with soccer. When I was younger, I was a referee. I played soccer my whole youth and through high school. And I was a referee for the Bumblebees League, which was the children who were, I think, on maybe 5 and under. And it was just hilarious because it wasn't soccer we were playing. It was chase the ball, right? So it's really a bumblebee. it's a herd of little honeybees chasing the ball all around the field. And that's what first plane sports look like. They're all they can think of is the one goal, get the ball, right? When a child is in their second plane, they start to understand that there's how the rules work and that there's a differentiation in tasks. So there's positions, and each position has a role that it plays and a job that it does and an area that it stays in. And then it's how we work together as a team with each person doing their part to make this game happen. And so that's, some of the group instinct is they're seeking out those opportunities where there are rules to follow. Sometimes they'll make up their own games and make up their own rules and figure out, how does this work? How do we all do a task together? So is your child content with a smaller group of peers? Or are they drawn to and curious about groups of children when they see them? Have they been on a team? Were they engaged? Were they able to have a task where they chasing butterflies while the rest of the group is swarming around the ball. Can they work with a group for the entire Montessori work period? These are marks that they are moving into that second plane. Moral development. So this is a big one. The second plane child needs to understand themselves and have opportunities to use their own judgment. They're seeking justice in social situations. Again, you know this because continually nerves are hit whenever whenever something has happened that's unfair or unjust. Does your child seek to resolve social problems without the assistance of an adult? Does your child ask questions about what is fair or right in different situations? Are your answers consistent to those questions? Does your child pick up on discrepancies in your responses and point them out to you? A second plane child does. They ask why and how for everything. They seek to question the universe and can imagine, which again really is seeing it in their minds, the explanations rather than seeing them in front of them. So this is that imagination is active. In the picture up in the upper right corner in the Montessori Elementary, children use timelines to imagine really all of human history and of every possible kind of subject you can look into. And they are seeing it and they're seeing how it works and they're imagining. And then they're also able to imagine things that are happening not only in the past and a different time and place, but things that could happen in the future and the universe, the teeniest, tiniest microscopic things to the largest, biggest galaxies and stars. And the imagination is their vehicle to that. They love to exercise it. Does your child, oops, I think I might not have put in the right questions for this. So basically, your child should be asking why for a lot of things and not being as interested in what something is. They want to know how it got to be that way. How is it going to be in the future? What does it mean? There's a need for big work. So the second plane child gets really excited about making big problems work out. I can't remember exactly what this work in the elementary is that they're doing. They're classifying, I think, the that one of the, I think the bacteria, the kingdom of bacteria. I might be wrong on that, but they want to make sense of all of it and they're putting it into an order. They're matching it to a timeline. And this is going to take days and it's going to take teamwork to get to it. Does your child seek to resolve problems that do not have an easy or immediate solution? Does your child want to include others in this task? If you don't immediately offer a solution, does your child seek out resources to help them in their task? This is a great time to have a current set of World Book Encyclopedia at your somewhere in your home. To teach them how to find answers the old-fashioned way versus Google. Although if you have an Alexa, this would be another way that you could be observing this. Is Alexa getting consulted on all kinds of things? Is your child able to carry over concentration over several days while working on the big work? There's an increased sense of responsibility. They start to utilize their new powers of imagination, abstract thinking, and morality, and they're now able to understand the results of their actions. They can empathize and take responsibility for the outcomes, even when they are hard or negative. So we've got somebody using a hot, dangerous tool up in the right. So we do have some children's houses have ironing, and a child has to earn that, being able to have that responsibility. They have to have proven that they're worthy of that and that they will help keep everybody safe. They'll keep themselves safe. They'll keep the materials safe. So going back to that sense of responsibility, does your child empathize with others or imagine how they feel? Does your child take responsibility for their actions, even when it's difficult? Does your child employ the will to understand where someone else is coming from? So the second plane child has a completely different mind from the first plane child. There's reasoning that's emerging between 6 and 7 years old, which is again why we encourage children to stay well into their age 6. Sometimes we have 7-year-olds in the children's house. Some children take a little longer to shift into that second plane, and we have plenty they can work on. Posing a question to a child this age that she can ponder, reason, and search for answers is like priming a little pump in terms of igniting interest in learning. They need less external order. You might notice this in the messy room. Instead, have an insatiable desire to create internal order, to seek understanding and organize it all in her mind. They move from being completely at peace working alone to being driven to work with peers. We can hardly keep them away from each other when they're 6 years old. Big work and group work are always part of the Montessori elementary environments, and we start to introduce them to that in the children's house in their completion year. They have a powerful sense of justice and a budding morality, as well as a very strong tendency to emulate a hero, making it a very important time to tell stories of people with strong character, as well as involve the children in every aspect of the systems of justice that govern their school and home environments. In contrast to the absorbent mind of the younger children, elementary children are ready to imagine that which they have not yet seen and seek answers to their many curiosities. So, this is a good time to introduce the family meeting and have an agenda, a weekly agenda that problems and things go on that we discuss, and that we have certain expectations in this house, and this is the way things are done. And I notice that, this hasn't been happening, or this other thing has been happening that's not in line with our values, or we have an expectation that you clean your room, that you keep your room clean, or that project that you're working on is off of the kitchen table by dinner time. These are ways that you can address it. Children are very hungry to understand how systems work. So we have some hard to acknowledge news. This is really not a fun thing. I don't want to have to discuss it or bring it up, but I think it's a factor. And I think for this to be a complete presentation, it needs to be said. So there are real life consequences of your child leaving before they complete the program, of going to mainstream kindergarten, if you would. So leaving prior to the completion year means that you are accepting an incomplete. Your child's experience is incomplete. Your financial investment that you've put in 2 to 3 years doesn't get its return. It's incomplete. So the child has not been allowed to access the full second half of their experience. Thinking back to that image of the 1, 2, 3, the 1, 2 completion year. So the first year is just a quarter. The second year is the second quarter, because a lot of work is happening sort of in an invisible way that we don't necessarily see yet. Remember, it goes slowly at first and then suddenly leaps and explosions in that actualization of the completion year, when they've pulled all those different indirect preparations together, and it's suddenly, you can see it. So you don't get that full return on your investment when you pull out early. So sadly, this also harms the school. Being a director, it is my job to explain this, that the investments of time, energy, and resources that we put in, the guides, the staff, the families, they mean something. And we can't replace a child who's leaving and has taken a space from the time they were 3. You just can't. We can't get the first 2 formative years back in if we try to get in a new child. It's just not the same. That negatively impacts the community of children, and their experiences of the other children, what they're experiencing. They're missing those children who are their models, who are pulling it all together, who are showing those the excitement for learning and those discoveries and those skills, and of the other families who've kept their children into complete. It's negatively impacting them that their child doesn't get that same experience that that the other families who have kept their children in have invested for everybody. Hopefully that makes sense. It also means that you're accepting your child's experience will be incomplete, and they'll be starting over in a new system. And can't speak exactly to where your child might be going, but we can say, sometimes in mainstream education, these things might be true. So your child may need to be working to bring the whole system may be working to bring the whole class to a certain point in the curriculum versus following their individual needs and development of each child. This new system or new environment may be required to teach remedially if there are children who've never previously been in an education setting. So that can sort of put children into a holding pattern at times, which is, again, valuable time in their development. It may not align with the preparations that specifically have been made in the Children's House in Montessori that we've put in place. And we put those in place with the expectation that a child will have the full first plane to pull them together in their own way and time. In a new environment, before they've finished the first plane, they may not understand all the learning that they've already done and experiences they have already had, which again, that's sort of a work that happens with the 6-year-old. They start to be reflective and make sense and see their place in the system and solidify all of the different learning they've already done. So it moves from that unconscious into the conscious, which they can take with them to the new learning environment when they're allowed to complete. They may need a long period of time. The new environment may need a long period of time to assess where each student's abilities are. Again, missing out on valuable first plane personality capacity building time. And they may rely heavily on screens for children's learning. We've heard from a family this year that their daughters are doing a lot of learning on screens and tablets in their kindergarten classroom. The good news, got to have some good news here, is that we offer the completion year discount. While our nonprofit organization already keeps our rates as low as possible, often less than traditional daycare or preschool despite our credentials, we recognize the difficulty of this decision, especially given the financial aspect of it. We now offer a completion year discount when children are entering into their kindergarten year, which we kind of define as their birthday after September 1st, or if they stay in lieu of entering first grade for an additional year. Some children require longer to complete their transition to the second plane, and we do have families who choose that, and it works really well. We also do our best to provide you with as much information as we can about our program and the importance of the completion year. We do this during the enrollment process. You get to observe those older children in action when you do your first observation. During the tour, we talk about it. It's repeated in the contract so that you are very clear that that's what you're signing up for. We explain it more in the parent handbook. In your continued observations, you continue to see the value for those children in their completion year and to the rest of the community when they're there. And we try to do additional education about the completion year, such as this presentation. So just kind of pulling it all together here, summarizing from their work in practical life. So when children are able to complete their first plane of development after 3 or 4 years in the Children's House, they will have been allowed the opportunity from practical life to exercise and build strong executive functions, coordinate their movements in alignment with their mind, which is really willpower, absorb and internalize high quality language, as well as grace and courtesy for others and how to be an active part of a community and navigate conflict, learn real and practical skills, and have had countless experiences in applying them in a meaningful way. When they've been allowed to complete in sensorial, they will have refined their sense perception in order to increase the accuracy of how they experience the world. They will have been able to build an attitude of friendliness with error, gain experience with making connections between areas of their learning, establish understandings of the relationships between things, and establish clear abstractions in their mind, which are the building blocks of true imagination. And we saw that that is essential for the next stage of development. Their work in language will have allowed them to gather the preparations to be an author, able to express themselves through spoken language and writing. gathered the preparations that lead them to total reading, being able to understand others' written thoughts, interpret their meaning, and appreciate their style. And explore the functions of grammar through fun games. Explore drama through reading analysis. Their preparations and work in the math area and through the completion year will have helped them to grasp the foundations of numeracy and quantity, including the decimal system, understand the operations and begin work on memorizing basic math facts, gain some experience with fractions, and gain experience using math as a tool for solving problems. All of their work will have given them experience with many indirect preparations that not only laid the foundation for their work in various areas of the Children's House, but for their future education. It has given them chances to apply their skills to care for themselves, others, to solve problems, and to work collaboratively, and given them experience on what being respected feels like, experience on what having responsibility can be like, and to be empowered. So aligning our approach with human development means that when their time in the Children's House comes to an end, they are ready to move on. When they have been allowed to complete their time, they are more able to transition. It's as though something has come to a natural end. It's in flow with the way of their development. They have outgrown the Children's House and are ready for a learning environment that serves the needs of the second plane child, which is first grade. It becomes apparent in the late spring that graduates who are in their 7th year of life, between ages 6 and 7, start to need an expanded social group and new experiences. We can support this need by cross-pollinating the two houses through visits and going and eating lunch in the other house and going over to get some material and bring it back, or work with friends on a new kind of lesson where we need some more children. We're in the same place in reading or in math as they continue to work until graduation. So this builds confidence in trying new things and stamina for adapting to a new environment as well. Again, we want them to be ready to leave, not leave before they feel like they're psychologically ready. Supporting your child in staying through their completion year in the Children's House means you're providing more than an early learning environment. You're giving them access to an education that is an aid to their life. You are supporting their current development. You're giving them a solid foundation for their future that is a springboard for future development and learning. And you're honoring your commitment to the school. You're also honoring the gift your child received from the previous families and children who mentored them in their early years in the Children's House. So if you still have questions, we do have some parents who've agreed to be resources. Just reach out and let me know, and we'll get you connected with them. I'm also available to, answer any additional questions, but hopefully this has answered many of your questions. And I hope that it's been informative and that you have enjoyed this very long presentation. Thank you for sticking with it to the end. All right, that concludes the presentation. Thank you.